What would happen if, as a community, we decided to have an open and honest conversation about how childhood trauma, particularly sexual trauma that happens to kids, how that affects the mental health of adults? It's uncomfortable to talk about. Of course it is. But problems don't get solved if we don't talk about problems. So it's probably time we started talking about these problems. My guest this week on the podcast is Emma Jane. She is an author and an associate professor at UNSW. She specialises in gender, misogyny on the internet, the future of work, the social and ethical impacts of technology, and she's a prolific author. Her latest book, Diagnosis Normal, addresses the complicated combination of autism, mental illness, and childhood sexual abuse. But ultimately, it's a story about a person who, despite all of that, is still someone who has an incredible life, an incredible family, and an incredible career. It's a great conversation, and I can't wait to get into it. So let me tell you about my guest today. Emma Jane is an associate professor at UNSW. Her work specialises in gender, misogyny on the internet particularly, the future of work, the future of social and ethical impacts of emerging technologies on our society. She's presented her findings to the Australian Human Rights Commission, the Australian Government's Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and the Festival of Dangerous Ideas at the Sydney Opera House. She's a prolific author, and her latest book is Diagnosis Normal. It's a candid, first-hand account of the complex combination of autism, mental illness, and childhood sexual abuse, and how those things combine to affect and shape the life of an adult, how it created the person that she is, and ultimately how it implores ultimately how some of these things impact other people who have experienced similar things in our community. And critically, by breaking the toxic silence around sexual violence and mental illness, Emma Jane really raises the possibility of not just surviving these things, but also thriving with these things. As she writes in her book, we need to speak unspeakable things. We need more unpretty stories. And we do cover this in our chat, that the unspeakable thing is that, for example, when I was a kid, the stranger danger we were warned about was, a man in a van and a trench coat waiting by the bus stop, but that wasn't it. That wasn't the person that was abusing children. Certainly kids that I knew that were getting abused, they were abused by teachers, by sports coaches, by family members, particularly family members. But that one's so uncomfortable, we don't like to talk about it. But it's the truth. Your child's more likely to get abused by someone you know than someone you don't know. But we don't like to talk about that. But we fucking should. It's an unpretty story. And we're really going to get into the weeds here, my friends, because we can't have this conversation without talking about the tricky stuff. We're going to talk about suicide, childhood sexual abuse, suicidal ideation, self-harm, hospitalisation, all kinds of tricky stuff. But it's important that we talk about these things, because the more we talk about uncomfortable things, the more comfortable these things become to talk about. And then the more we talk about them, the more we're able to find possibility and pathways and solutions to these things. Because if we just pretend they don't exist, then things just fester, don't they? You can find out more about Emma Jane at our website, emmajane.info. Enjoy this conversation with Emma Jane. I'm bloody grateful we could do this. Thank you so much for making the time to come and speak with me today, Emma Jane. It's wild, and I'm trying to think. Like, we were on television together in a former life, if I recall.
Channel V?
Yeah.
I mean, having come from the rock and roll industry, my memory is like a bit patchy in places, but yes, the good old days of Channel V.
Yeah, look, I'm 12 years sober. Emma, so like I kind of know that, like, if you were in an Australian band around that era, you probably sat on our set and I probably interviewed you.
Yeah, I feel like hundreds of years sober, but that period is still quite blurry for me.
Yeah. I mean, you're actually sober, because I'm like, I count days and I have steps in my life. There's more than 11 and less than 13.
I'm not that kind of
Okay.
sober, but I just not into drinking. I'm not into altered state. I don't need any more altered states than the ones that occur naturally. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure that out. I was, I think when the first kind of tendrils of kind of quasi-psychosis starts showing up when I'm smoking hydroponic weed in South Australia, I'm like, I don't like this. I know. I think the secret is to just try to smoke more. That'll change it.
Oh, yeah. That'll show those tendrils of quasi-psychosis a thing or two.
No, actually.
Yeah.
It was fucking terrible. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And I too came to the conclusion that, you know what, my brain does a pretty good job by itself. I might not need to have psilocybin. I'll be okay. You have fun with your ayahuasca there. Enjoy. But I'll be over here dealing with what I'm dealing with. Quite the journey you've been on to end up as an associate professor from someone who played in a fantastic pop rock and roll band.
Yeah, imposter syndrome much. Like every day I turn up at work and it's like, oh my God, people are taking me seriously.
As I'm guessing when you were a kid, if you ended up playing in a band, when you were a kid, it was music.
Yeah, no, when I was a kid, it was dentistry.
What?
Yeah, I know. I think it was Stockholm syndrome because I spent a lot of time in the dentist chair. And so it was either when I grow up, want to be a dentist or one of the countdown dancers.
Right. I
didn't have the perm for the countdown dancing gig.
Oh, for people who are maybe younger than people who are maybe born after the year 2000, Countdown.
People who were born after dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Yeah, Countdown was before YouTube. There was a TV show called Countdown, and it was the only way we could watch music videos. And if we couldn't get the band or we didn't have a music video, they would just play the song, and then a troupe of dancers would create a routine and dance. And that was what
visual extravaganza
and
in lycra.
And that's what they would play. I think famously, there's the Billie Jean, I think. We didn't have a video for Billie Jean in Australia. They didn't release it here forever. And there's this fantastic 80s thing in front of the El Alamein Fountain in King's Cross. So these people doing this doom, 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 doom music. It's great. But what a gig. And I'm sure if you're a countdown dancer, you only work once a week. So perhaps dentistry or dental assistantry was how you paid the bills. So they could have worked together.
They could have dovetailed nicely.
So you're hooked into dentistry? Is that where you aimed?
No, look, I didn't. I really wanted to be a writer. Back then, I played the clarinet, which is like one of the most daggy instruments in the known universe. And so I didn't get into the whole guitar scene until my late teens. I sold my wooden clarinet and bought a Fender.
There you go. There you are. And away you went. You got in the van and played some songs. That would have been fun.
It was fun. It was hard to play standing up at first. Like I did a lot of practice at home in my bedroom, and the first time I stood up with an electric guitar, I was like, holy crap, this is strange. And like all, aspiring riot girls, I played very poorly for a very long time, but the volume was always up to 11.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain, and I always would tell, when we did that Australian Idol show, the best singers weren't the ones that won. The ones that won were the ones who sold it, the ones who made everyone believe it. And that's why punk was so amazing, because they could not fucking play at all. But Christ,
that was the point, right?
Yeah.
That was the point, that you couldn't fucking play at all.
Yeah.
And, one of my first live music group was an all-girl band called, cleverly enough, All Girl Band.
Excellent.
And we did covers of misogynist classics.
Amazing.
We owned it, and we were terrible.
So hang on. So tell me when you went to an all girl band gig. So say for example, what is it? Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane,
Sydney, yeah, Sydney, Sitters, yeah.
So you're in, I don't know, like what, Club 77 or something, or the Sandown?
We didn't quite get to Club 77. That was sort of RSL,
All right.
suburban RSL clubs.
So when I showed up to a gig from all girl band, what do you open with?
Well, Gimme Head by the Radiators was a popular crowd favourite. My Sharona by the Knack of. Are You Old Enough?
Oh
by
my
Foreigner.
God. You're saying all these songs, and I used to play some of them when I worked in radio. And as you're mentioning them now, I'm like, yeah, that hook, the Dragon song, Are You Old Enough? That was a charting song. That was top 10.
I know, creepy, right? And I bet you weren't playing them ironically back then either, Osher.
Oh, that's right. It's the Hunter Brothers and Dragon on B105. That's what I was doing.
Yeah, so, and a lot of Akadaka, obviously.
At least I'd like to think Akadaka owned it.
Akadaka, I've still got a soft spot for Akadaka.
Yeah.
But, they weren't the most woke musical group lyrically, right? Let's be honest about it.
No, I mean, look, She's Got the Jack is probably, I don't know, it's an ode to a different time of sexual health, I think. Penicillin could make everything go away.
Was it an STI reference?
You're today days old when you've discovered that the Jack was Australian slang for the clap or gonorrhea.
Wow.
She's got the Jack.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I've learned so much from you already, Osher.
Which is just why in the second verse, Bond's like, well, I thought it was awesome, but it wasn't.
Okay. As soon as we finish chatting, I'm going back and I'm going to re-listen to the Jack and I'm going to finally get it.
Yeah, that's right. It took me a long while to figure it out.
Wow.
Yeah. But that's fine. It's amazing to think in our own lifetimes, these things have gone from, no worries to, cancel.
Although the only thing weirder and sort of more disturbing than that is the fact that, even with contemporary media and, popular music lyrics, some of them are still really problematic.
This is true. And then an artist such as Megan Thee Stallion comes on the scene and drops probably the most exciting song of the last 5 years, tragically at a time when no one could go to a nightclub and dance to it, which I'm sad for them. I'm sad that, kids weren't able to get on the dance floor to Wet Ass Pussy and just have the best time ever. Because it dropped when there were no nightclubs open.
Yeah.
It's a fucking great song.
It is a fucking great song. Although for me, being sort of on the autism spectrum, the idea of going to a nightclub and, jumping around, that's my idea of a nightmare, no matter how fucking good the song is.
Yeah. I'm with you. I used that beer blanket to insulate me from that for a very long time, and I don't do that anymore.
Have you seen those ostrich pillows?
I have.
You can buy those full head coverings that sort of just leave you a little breathing hole, but basically give you a great big pillow for your whole head.
Maybe that is what you and I know what we're going to do. We're going to call it going out on the spectrum. That's what we're going to call a product. And it's like an ostrich pillow, which is like a big soft helmet. So no bouncers are going to be upset. You're like, it's still me. You can take it like, it's still me. I just need this so I can be in a crowd. And that way you don't get sweat or wet hair on your face. When someone flicks their hair and you get other people's sweat on your cheek, then you can go and enjoy a gig. And
exactly, and it'll be a full body version too.
I'm in.
Because we don't want to be brushing up against anyone and,
Emma, I reckon.
Possibly with one of those inbuilt space nappies so that we don't have to go and deal with the nightmare of the public bathroom situation.
Get Cannon Brooks on the phone. We're going to get the pitch deck by lunchtime and we'll launch by Tuesday.
Can't wait. We won't call it the ostrich pillow. We'll call it the Osher pillow.
It's on. We're going to make it happen. You mentioned your spectrum diagnosis, which I'm assuming is something you didn't know at the time when you were playing in bands and you were going out and you were being in an all-girl band. How old were you when you started to think maybe something's a bit different here?
I always knew something was really different, but I explained it in, different. I just thought, I was just a weirdo or just an asshole or like just difficult. I didn't get formally diagnosed until, I don't know, early 2020.
Oh, wow.
Which is common. Girls and women are often slip through the diagnosis net with autism.
What does it present as? What do the symptoms present as? Because you're clearly trying to find solutions to why things weren't working.
Oh, how did my symptoms present?
Like, what were doctors going, oh, no, it's this?
So very sort of profoundly, rapidly antisocial. Really difficult at small talk. Like I struggle desperately with small talk, blurting out weird things that, anything that crosses my mind, like it's out my mouth before I've done the sort of let's form that into something socially acceptable. So I've always been in a lot of trouble at work and, for sort of weird swearing. Like not funny swearing like we're doing now, right? Not funny swearing, but weird swearing. I remember when I first started work at my university, I was at a markers meeting and one of the other teachers was talking about something and I just blurted out, oh, you're a sensitive fucker, aren't you? And it was out and I agree that it's not a particularly appropriate thing to say in that setting. But the guy, I guess quite rightly sort of made a complaint about me and, I was sort of mildly disciplined. And at the time it was like, why? Why do I do this? Because I'm not I still don't recall why I even said it or how it came out. But so a lot of incidents like that. And also, autism is all about atypical sensory processing. So really struggling with not so much loud sounds, but if there's sounds of two different types at the same time, like if there's loud music, but there's also someone talking, or loud music and also, the sounds of drinks being poured at a bar, say, which means, again, those types of nightclub scenes are really not happy places for me.
So what you just said about that workplace scenario, that sort of thing happened to me a lot when I first got blurted out into the kind of world of professionalness. And it was a lot of people taking me aside going, dude, you can't do that. You can't do that in a meeting. You can't do that. And maybe because I was a man and because I had showed promise as a radio announcer, they gave me more slack, I think. I had a lot of latitude. It took me a long time to figure out that is not a good way to talk to people. It made sense in my brain.
Yeah, it's not a good way to talk to people, but I'm ambivalent about diagnoses because I think it's easy to sort of potentially make them your full identity. But what would have been helpful for me in terms of having an earlier diagnosis of autism is that I would have been like, oh, okay, that's just happened again. And perhaps in the moment say, look, oh God, dude, I'm so sorry about that. I have a condition, but it would have I would have been easier on myself, I think, and potentially like, no matter, that was an inappropriate thing to say. And I obviously made that guy really uncomfortable, but to be continually disciplined through your professional life for that sort of thing, and to feel really bad about it, like that takes a toll.
And I guess, your confidence in your ability to do work and your confidence and to expose yourself to new teams where new research and work opportunities could show up would start to have an effect. Let's just jump back for a second. When did okay, this playing in bands thing is over and academia, that looks interesting. How did that show up?
Again, trying to sort of jumpstart my stuttering memory, but I did the band thing sort of for about a decade while also working in the media. And then I started studying at night, partly because you could see that the whole media industry was sort of starting to cough up blood. It was not looking good, but also I did get a lot of crap when I was working in the media. Like again, different time, but I got a lot of shit for being stupid and being a bimbo and all this kind of stuff. And part of starting to study was a deliberate decision to take myself more seriously. Like, I knew I couldn't make anyone else necessarily take me seriously, but I wanted to take myself more seriously. And I also wanted to retrain, you know, in case I didn't have a media job anymore. And as it happened, I just fucking loved studying. I loved it. I still love it. It is a great passion. It does not leave room for, you know, lugging huge amps to, you know, to studios to practice or perform music. So it was really, when I realized how much I loved studying, it was like I have to do one or the other. And I chose, you know, doing a master's, doing a PhD, and going down that avenue.
So could we talk a little bit about your time in journalism? It was print journalism. What was can you talk about the outlet? Can you talk about where this kind of stuff was happening?
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly print, but it was also some TV and radio. I started out as a cadet journalist on a small country newspaper where my main job was to put the dollar signs in fruit and vegetable reports and sub-edit the Greyhound results. And eventually I got a gig at the Sydney Morning Herald, spent 7 years there, then spent, I think, nearly 12 years at the Australian, doing sort of bits and pieces of TV and radio along the way.
I'm shocked that people called you bimbo, and yet I'm not surprised. Was it really that bad? Was it really that kind of big dick swinging, we're off to lunch girly, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. It was horrible. Like, it was... and it wasn't just the way that you got treated around the office. Like, when I was at the Herald, a very senior, very well-respected at the time journalist used to pull us aside, the women, the young women, and let us know which of our outfits he thought were the most flattering, and would give us advice on, you know, perhaps don't wear that one again, love. I liked it better when you wore this one, or could you perhaps, you know, switch your shoes tomorrow because a bit of heel really doesn't go astray. So there was that type of horrible around the office stuff. But there was also, and you know, you'd know this from being in the media, is that when your colleagues or former colleagues have a bone to pick with you, or don't like you that week, they can like let their views be known on the, you know, in the media and through the media. And so when I moved from the Sydney Morning Herald to the Australian, people were writing dreadful things, like really very defamatory things, that I, you know, would never have wanted to sort of go down that sort of lawsuit route, but absolutely astounding inferences around, you know, the thing that all women do when they get successful, which is to sleep their way to the top. So people were writing that, you know, journalists were ringing me and saying, I'm not making this up. Within like 24 hours of me meeting with the News Limited people to switch from what was then Fairfax to News Limited, within 24 hours, I hadn't signed a contract, hadn't spoken to anyone, and a journalist rang me and said, we understand that you on to get this job, you know, like, is this what happened? It was like, whoa, dude, you know, they've got like a no way you could on. But the point being, there was just that kind of dreadful shit, and it did not go away. Like, it was really really horrible and oppressive, and I'm really glad to be away from it.
Goodness. And that was just, and I'm sure that would have been hopefully the dying days of that kind of behaviour, but I'm sure that kind of thing was just rife. I mean, early in this podcast, I had the extraordinary pleasure to interview Ida Buttrose, and listening to her, and you know what, even not just listening to her, seeing the look in her eye when I asked her a similar question, she kind of like had the, you know, if you ever meet a war vet from Afghanistan or Iraq, they kind of have this little thing in their eye that goes, and they see it all just kind of flash real quick, and then they go, Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. It was what you thought it was. Like,
The 1,000-yard stare of
yeah,
the journalism veteran.
yeah, and yet we are in this time now where we're recording this, crikey, 5 days before a federal election, and I'm assuming either the people that were doing this sort of stuff in your workplace are either still involved in senior positions, or people that worked under them and looked up to them and emulated their behaviour are now in positions. And as far as you're aware, has that culture continued, or has that culture kind of tried to get stamped out?
I haven't been inside the media culture for a long time. My gut feeling is that it's not going to be as bad as what it used to be. In the same way as it wasn't as bad for me as it would have been for women, 20 years before me. But there's still enough casual, sexism or just outright blatant misogyny to make me feel that there's still a lot of work to be done. And we've got the internet now. Like, there's a whole new front for this kind of gendered harassment and abuse now.
And it's also, it can come anonymously, and it can also come from multiple angles. 16, 17 different, accounts can say very similar things about you. They all may be from the same person. And it's impossible.
Yeah, so this is where I've done most of my academic research, because I was a bit of a canary in the coal mine when it came to online abuse, because I very clearly remember when email was invented and we thought it was a great idea to put our email addresses at the bottom of our journalism, our opinion
He
pieces.
published them.
And yeah. And, I'd always got a lot of hate mail just because I was opinionated and, I was a woman in public also. But it was sort of retired naval officers pointing out grammatical errors and,
Yes.
accusing me of leading young people astray and so on, which I took as the highest compliment. But as soon as the internet was invented and the email address was there at the column, like literally hundreds and hundreds of rape and death threats every week, like relentlessly for the rest of my time in journalism. And then it went away for a bit when I stopped sort of doing anything in public. And then the moment I started talking about my research in public again, hello, here they are again. And yeah, it looks like it's all written by the same dude. It's clearly not. But I do wonder whether sometimes, with all of this emphasis on everyone being woke and that some of this stuff has just gone underground. And so it might look better on the surface, but there's this seething mess of, nastiness underneath still.
I'm always been fascinated by the work of Clementine Ford. I've enjoyed reading her books. The Fire Like a Girl I enjoyed, but Boys Will Be Boys was the one that really kicked me in the face as one of 4 boys, and then now as a father of a toddler. Listening to her story of, like, she had a son and she doesn't want her son to grow up to be the kind of man that will send rape and death threats to someone he doesn't know. Has your research shown any indication as to how the fuck our community ended up with this kind of thing being okay? And some guy who's got a photo of him with his family at SeaWorld having a great time on his Facebook or Twitter page is also the same guy that will DM a stranger a threat that if made to their face would put him in prison.
Yeah, so the fact that, a lot of people say, it's anonymity that's the problem. But in fact, as you've just pointed out, and as Clem has found out so many times, a lot of people are sending this from their open Facebook accounts with pictures of their family, up on their, I'm now off all social media. I refuse to be part of that scene. But in terms of what your question about, what we do in terms of raising boys, like, I think it's the way we raise all kids, really, which is that these really rigid stereotypes about what it means to be a boy and what it means to be a girl are really harmful. Like, they're not based in scientific reality. We are creating these 2 types of people. It's not just that, you'd hear in the playgrounds and so on, like the number of times people go, well, you know what boys are like, or you know how little girls are. You know what? No, like researchers have done amazing experiments showing that when people interact with babies that are dressed to imply a certain gender or sex, they behave very differently to those babies. So we are the ones that are creating the boys are like this and girls are like this. We don't appear from the womb or wherever we appear from. We don't appear with these, in two types, boys and girls. We make gender. And a lot of the research shows that that's one of the really big underlying drivers of everything from that sort of casual sexism to, really extreme sexual violence.
I would never want to compare sexual violence or rape or threats or death threats or anything like that. But I'm trying to draw a parallel to something that I do understand, and that's the climate denialism space, all right? And that they just believe so strongly in this thing that any presentation of a fact against that is taken as a personal affront, and therefore to refute, rather than change their mind because they're so aligned with their identity being, no, climate change isn't real. They're so aligned with that in their identity, then they will vehemently and viciously and personally attack the person presenting the fact because they feel it as a personal attack. That's the only thing I can kind of come close to trying to understanding this. So are you trying to say that the genders that some people have had their gender identity put upon them to the point where any threat to that they see so personally that they have to defend it as if like it's their last breath?
That's part of it, but to even create, like, part of my research, there's a general acceptance now that gender is, relatively fluid, or, not widespread acceptance, but growing acceptance. But in fact, when you look at the science, this idea of, like, if we talk about sex meaning biological characteristics, if you look at the science, there's actually not two sexes either. So if we go, okay, we're kind of getting our head around the idea that there could be more than two genders. When it comes down to biological sex and you look at all the markers that we use to go, are you male or female? You start seeing that, on things like hormones like testosterone, brain chemistry, chromosomes, all of them, what you see is that people are on this spectrum. And so even the notion of biological sex isn't binary. Like, there's a huge percentage of people that scientifically would be classed as intersex. And, people are very resistant to, perhaps in the same way or similar way to people are resistant to anything to do with climate that doesn't accord with the beliefs that, that they feel make them who they are. People really don't like hearing about the fact that it's possible that, not only is gender not a binary, but possibly, scientifically, biological sex isn't a binary either.
So how do we even start to have conversations with people who, might be trying to figure that out, and are initially very resistant and possibly aggressive in their responses when you may talk about, there's a kid at, my kid's school and Jim showed up, I'm just making up names here, Jim showed up for term 2 and Jane showed up for term 3. Same kid. Like, how do you begin to have a conversation? How do you even start to have that conversation about essentially, acceptance of this in that little kid's community, of their parents, of their teachers, of their doctors, of everyone, that no, this is probably their easiest path through life?
Look, I'm probably the wrong person to ask about how to have productive conversations because I'm pretty bad at those kinds of conversations. But I certainly, my 15-year-old identifies as a they, them and has changed their name. I'm fine with that. Their school is fine with it. A lot of their friends are preferring a they, them pronoun. I don't know, like, it seems it could be part of that generation's rebelliousness, or it could be, just making, sense of things differently. But I think when it comes to talking to people about views that they're very resistant to, or, they have that kind of anaphylactic reaction to. It's like, no, I don't want to hear it. I think that unfortunately it's very hard for us humans to have productive conversations into that difference between views while the internet is working the way it's currently working. And the way the internet is, the architecture of the internet at the moment is designed to, polarize people, encourage, shouting matches. It just happens to support the business model of, social media and most digital platforms. But we're not, as humans, very good at disagreement and talking to people that have very different views and experiences to us. Like, it's hard as humans in general, but the internet is making it, I think, almost impossible. There's a polarization happening. There's, a radicalization happening, and that's in every direction. It's not just, like feminists like me are radicalizing, as well as the people that we may be arguing with.
People may not have been realizing that since the 2006 Facebook, 2009 Twitter, that the way the algorithms of these platforms work is to promote the most reacted to comments, and the most reacted to comments are the most polarizing, binary, black or white comments. Yet, as humans, that's not how we speak. That's not how we, talk. That's not how we debate. That's not how we come to cooperation or moving forward. That blows my mind that people may not have realized this stuff's been happening under our feet.
Yeah, it's real boiling frog stuff, right? The metaphor of, a frog can be swimming around in a saucepan full of water that's nice and cold. And if you heat it up gradually, it won't think to jump out because the temperature's rising slowly, and then it's boiling. And the frog is boiled to death. And I think, unfortunately, something similar is happening with our digital spaces. When Mark Zuckerberg was first up at the US Congress, and I think it was Orrin Hatch, one of the elderly senators, sort of was marveling, like, how on earth do you make money? People don't pay to use your platform. And Mark Zuckerberg sort of smirked and famously said, "We run ads, Senator." And that's true, but it's also an incredible simplification of the way that digital business models work, right? Like, this has been pointed out in for instance, in that amazing movie, The Social Dilemma, a couple of years back. As social media users, we're not the customers. We're the raw product that is being mined for the customers, who are the people that are running the ads on social media or buying the data profiles that these platforms have put together about us. And the best way to keep us on platforms and therefore exposed to as many ads as possible, and therefore offering as much of our free data as possible, is to offer us content that's engaging. And unfortunately, what tends to be most engaging is the, outrage, binary positioning, conspiracy theories, all of the things, they appeal to our lesser angels, let's say.
How on earth do we combat this, Emma?
Well, I think about this day and night at the moment. Like, it's kind of my next big research project. It's one of those problems where it's going to require input at multiple points all at once. As an individual, I've withdrawn my eyeballs and my attention and my data from as many social media platforms as possible. I use a VPN. My data is mine. You're not having it for free. And I don't want to see your stupid ads, thanks. And I'd rather go talk to people in the street since I've been off social media. And again, I'm really not I'm not socially adept. I like people, I'm just not very good at them. But since withdrawing from social media, I know so many more of the people in my street. So from an individual position, I think that those of us who can afford to withdraw our attention and our data from as many digital platforms as possible, and some of us can't afford to do it. But those of us who can perhaps look to alternatives. Like I use Signal, which is an open source, not-for-profit, encrypted messaging service. So there's alternatives coming up, but also our governing institutions just aren't keeping up. We've got these sort of medieval institutions, and we've got this exponential digital technology, and there are a lot of problems with our governance in lots of ways at the moment. And one of the really big ones is that I don't think the institutions that govern our daily lives are keeping up with the potentially catastrophic threat that emerging digital technology poses.
And my God, we've seen that in the last 24 hours, haven't we? I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. We are recording this the day after there was someone again live streamed a horrendous hate crime. And it breaks my heart in a squillion pieces that this is there. And it just, for the people that person was trying to impress, it becomes, this shining beacon. For the people that person is trying to suppress, it, does the job. It keeps people in the heart. It's fucking horrifying. And you're right. How on earth can a government of any country regulate stuff like that? They can't. Jesus Christ. They can't decide where to put a bike lane in. How can they fucking do this?
Yeah, but they have to. Because I researched this area, like I playing around with some of the publicly available AIs, like publicly available AIs that you can very easily use for almost any purpose that you put your mind to. And, the problems that we've seen in the digital space are about to tip over. I mean, we're kind of already in the matrix. We're already in a digital dystopia. And I'm a mad tech nerd. I love technology. I just don't like seeing it being used in the way it's being used and in the completely unregulated way that it's being used.
So if you, let's say, for example, whatever government is in by the time this goes to air, and they tap you on the shoulder and say, all right, Associate Professor Emma Jane, we'd like to get your guidance on what the regulations should be. Give us your top 3. Go. What would you do?
Oh, geez. Put me on the spot much, Osher. If we had to start with something, it would be introducing, like having it mandated that platforms like Facebook or Meta have to introduce more friction points to make it harder for people to behave poorly. And Facebook's internal research shows that even adding 1 click to sharing content, you can still share it, you've just got to click a bit harder, has the potential to reduce the sharing of harmful content dramatically. So that's something we could do straight away. I would also like to see, in the same way that, a tree is worth more dead than alive, I think I want to see governments making people pay to harvest and use our data. And I want the equivalent of cigarette warnings on some of our social media platforms so that people are aware that they're using technology that has been shown, and again by Facebook's internal research team as well as outsiders, that it is really not recommended for teenagers, for people with, wobbly mental health. These should come with health warnings. That's 2. Maybe you've heard of coded bias and the fact that, technology is not neutral. It reflects the biases of the people that build it. I would like to see government investment in the technology education space, the explicit embedding of the values that we hold dear into our into the building of our technologies, so that people are being nudged towards better behavior rather than what's happening now, which is being nudged towards the worst kind of behavior. So we're already being nudged. You know, we're already being manipulated. I would just like to see us being nudged in the opposite direction. So there's three.
That's three amazing, incredible things. And while I doubt those things are going to become policy in the next, couple of years, it's important to hear those from you, because that allows us to kind of go, all right, so an associate professor said that these things would be the best things to try. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I use this tech or hand this tech to my kids.
Osher, I think it actually does have the potential to become policy. And this is not just me wishful thinking. This is me working with politicians of both major parties and some of the, and the Greens, who are concerned and looking for ways forward. So it's not, it's easy to get disillusioned, and I feel pretty cynical myself about I really don't like partisan politics. I don't like our current system. Big fan, like you, of citizen assemblies and deliberate democracies.
I'm all about it.
Very political myself, completely anti-partisan political. But there actually is the individual level of politicians across the parties, a desire to have things be different, partly because they're on the receiving end of a lot of horrific abuse.
I can only imagine. And that's kind of interesting that individually the people within the Australian government system all want change, yet they're stifled by the very system itself that is too lumbering, too slow, too almost has a coded bias not to change, which is kind of interesting.
It's a medieval system. Like, these are medieval institutions. They were suited to the, just to the industrial age. They are not suited to the digital age at all. I'm still cautiously optimistic that there is a groundswell of academics and whistleblowers from the big companies, and people saying this is serious. Things have got to change. But again, we look at some of the other big crises of our time, like we look at climate change and so on. It's easy to look at these big problems and just go, throw up your hands in despair. But from my perspective, I feel passionately about these things, and it's important to me to keep lobbying, even if it doesn't get anywhere. I'm personally going to go down fighting.
The rising and extraordinary, it's wild how quickly the very kind of thing that you were talking about was happening in your office in the 90s, print media, has transferred into the digital space, and women in our community are in extraordinarily creative ways being oppressed and manipulated financially, socially through technology, to the point where there's now laws that have had to be passed in our country against this sort of thing and being coercively, manipulated online. Where are we with that? What would you like to see, happen in that space around, gender equality? Because that's not just, an anonymous account with a ute on it going, yeah, I'll fucking kill you. Yeah. Like, it's, actually, I now have your bank account,
Yeah. The minutiae of policy is not one of my special interests or special skills, but I do think that, and having sort of tracked different laws that have been passed sort of around the world over the last 10 years, there's been, for my money, an over-focus on bad actors and a complete ignoral of bad architecture, like the bad architecture of the internet that is supporting many of the problems. Like, absolutely, if someone is like, domestic violence and digital abuse have, now go hand in hand. There's a lot of ways that people can, extend the sort of violence perpetrated against women offline, having it into the online space, and they move together and, facilitate each other. But I actually think that when it comes to legislation, if we look at the digital spaces being more like the kind of physical spaces that we live in, like we don't keep social control by surveilling everyone and arresting everyone, right? Like we've got all sorts of things in place to, again, nudge the citizens to behave well, whether that's a speed bump, to slow down the cars, or a gradual rollout of privileges when you're learning to drive. I feel that passing laws, and this is what's happened in Australia and elsewhere, passing laws that target individual bad actors on the internet, it is important. No one should get away with those kinds of really, that kind of really bad behaviour. But if we want to see a really a more holistic, broad spectrum type of shift, we need to start thinking about those digital spaces the same way we think about our physical spaces. And in the same way as you don't like turn 17 or 18 and like, here's the keys to the fastest car on the planet, go for it, buddy, go as fast as you like. People have to prove themselves, and if they screw up, they have to go back a bit. It seems crazy to me that, and we used to call it the information superhighway back in the day. It seems crazy to me that people can go into those spaces and have all the privileges, all the rights, and no responsibility. There should be something akin to the kinds of fines that we get if we don't, perhaps wear our bike helmet, or, those kinds of infringements that aren't necessarily court cases and prison and so on, but a lot more accountability, and a lot more emphasizing the fact that there's a lot of amazing privileges we get with digital technology, but it comes with responsibilities. And if we don't live up to that, then we shouldn't have the same rights that we had before online.
You mentioned before that there's a 15-year-old that you parent. What kind of mum are you around iPad time and stuff like that when they were little?
Look, I was like, it's just another moral panic about technology. There's always been hysteria about new technologies, and so I was pretty easygoing early on. And it was also a different digital world back then. Although I remember watching with amusement when they were like 2 or 3, there was a like hard copy magazine, and they were there with their fingers, a pincer fingers, trying to make the photo bigger in the hard copy.
I've seen Wolfie do that, yeah.
Funny, so funny. And I mean, I get to my house and I'm clicking my car keys at the front door. I was like, why isn't it opening? Oh, yeah.
I touched the page of a book last night on a word I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Like, what am I doing?
I now make use of, I don't know whether to mention the company, but fuck it, it's doing so well. I really like the way that Apple is partly making it a point of difference around privacy and security, making it easier for parents to go in and not have it all or nothing. My kid currently has a lot of limitations, but there's not an absolute ban. But if things get a bit out of hand, then we pull back on, how much screen time is permitted in any given day. But there's, everything goes off at 9:30 if it's a school night. There's hard limits on certain platforms.
Yeah, it's when you put as you mentioned, the very architecture of the platforms that have exploded, that then this same architecture, which has then been copied, unfortunately, by the news organizations, and the same business model is,
absolutely.
The most amount of clicks is what gets us money. Go, and so incendiary headlines and shit like that. In combination with devices that are actually designed in this wild lab in Stanford that has shown people how to actually hack habits and put variable rewards in, and like totally we're unable to put it down. Like there's no way that my brain, my 48-year-old brain can actually compete against this endless stream of perfectly curated things that are being sent towards me because I have spent more than a millisecond on this video than that video. Like,
Yeah.
when you put those two things together and then put them in the hands of a 12-year-old at 10 p.m., like, of course they can't go to bed. Like, it's stupid to think they can.
Oh, and I can't either. I have to. I know all this stuff. I've, urge surf and impulse surf all the time, meaning, I feel an urge and don't always necessarily think it's a good idea to act on it. But if my phone's next to me when I'm sleeping, if it's in the same room, I'll be reading, and then it's like, oh, I wonder what that word means, or I wonder what that author's done before. And I just, well, it's not going to hurt. It's just a quick duck, duck, go. And then, 2 hours later, I bought another pair of shoes, and I feel like shit. Like, I constantly have to monitor my own usage because we are up against really sophisticated AIs that have been designed by persuasive technologists to addict us. And they've done a great job. It's very hard to resist. And that's why it's wherever possible, I try not to be in one of those willpower situations. Like, the phone goes out. It's not up for negotiation. I don't negotiate with terrorists or social media. It's bedtime. The phone goes away.
It's funny you mentioned the will. I don't want to be in a willpower moment. I'm 12 years sober now, and it's exactly the reason why, if back when I could, and I, have done it once since COVID, check into a hotel, I'll call on the way from the airport, or as I'm checking in, I say, can you send someone up to the minibar? Send up someone to the room and empty the minibar, because I'm not going to drink, but the bandwidth that it takes in my head to ignore those tiny little bottles of vodka, it means I can't get anything done. I just like the whole time. It's like having a radio going, hey, I'm over here. Remember that thing that we used to do? We used to have fucking tons of fun. Forget about all the bad stuff. Just keep going. I'm over here. Come on. No, look up. Look. But if it's out of the room, it's like, oh, I can read my book. I can call my wife. I can,
Yeah, it's spot on. It's like freeing up the emotional and mental bandwidth.
Yeah.
And not having to be like, I have someone that also manages a lot of mental health stuff. There's constant, conversations going on under the surface, and constant monitoring to, wherever possible, make decisions that set me up for good decisions further down the track. And well, I've got it doesn't always work, but I've got pretty good at knowing where I get wobbly and trying to make good decisions so that it doesn't get easier to make the bad decision. And, isn't it a shame that we have to go, it's those of us who've had addiction and like severe mental health problems and stuff that do this kind of work, whereas anyone would benefit from it.
And you're absolutely right. People, I talk about it whenever when I do speaking gigs, I talk about it all the time. It's like the life that I get to live because of the steps I take habitually every day to maintain good mental health means that my life is fucking amazing compared to what it was when I just kind of fell forward into whatever was in front of me. If I'm deliberate about sleep, eat, exercise, and I'm deliberate about just setting a reminder in my phone because I have to just check, am I okay? What am I noticing? Actually, I'm a bit anxious. I didn't notice that before. Why? And then just kind of down-regulating a bit and then moving on through the next hour and a bit of my day. Like, that shit has changed everything and changed the way I work and the way I am with people around me. You mentioned mental health, and it's a big part of your story. Is it okay if we talk about it? You feel okay talking about it today?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Because it's kind of interesting what happens to you. COVID lockdown was fucked for everybody, like fucking fucked. All right, I got really lucky in that we had some runway and I was able to very quickly get on eBay and buy all the lights and cameras and microphones that I needed so I could keep the podcast going and keep, money coming in. But not everybody had that. It was really hard for a lot of people and it took extraordinary tolls. As you mentioned, for people who were unprepared, with no mental health management tools, it fucking hit people real hard, particularly if the only down regulation they had available to them was alcohol. And it was fucking hefty. You had a very different lockdown experience to others, didn't you?
Well, look, I went completely bonkers. and I'm allowed to say bonkers because I am bonkers.
I've been bonkers. I've been on enough antipsychotics at the same time to say, oh no, I was bonkers.
Yeah, I'm a nut job. So I was already a nut job before COVID. But the combination of, so looking back to 2020, the combination of not, I had my academic job and we were teaching, doing everything from home, but the tertiary sector has crashed and there was a lot of people, no longer have jobs. So there was employment anxiety and we were locked down in the same house for months and months and months. And part of my autism gig is I need a lot of alone time. I need a lot of time to recharge and sort of just mull things over. And I just coped and coped and coped and coped until, a few months in, my daughter went back to their dad's house. And when I didn't have that responsibility anymore, I just lost it. Like I've had a good handful of like what they used to call nervous breakdowns. I know it's not a medical term, but I managed to have them anyway from time to time. But I had a real crash, and I've dealt with major depression and anxiety and complex PTSD most of my life. And so I could see that I was in a really bad place. Like, suicidal ideation is something that I've also dealt with most of my life. And I'm aware of when it starts going from just something in the background to being something I need to take seriously. And at that point, I realized I needed to take it seriously, rang one of the helplines, and the phone cut out. Well, because of telecommunications and stuff. And I thought, oh, fuck it, I was sick of the conversation. I had a friend coming over, and I thought if they're worried about me, they can call me back. And what they did was to alert the emergency services. And so, 15 minutes after that call, I had 3 coppers arrive and an ambulance and 3 paramedics. And I was sectioned, which means to be put into a psychiatric hospital, whether you want to go or not. Only briefly, as soon as I spoke to the psychiatric registrar in the hospital I was taken to, she was like, you've got this. I can see that you've got all your supports in place. And I felt like it was an overreaction. But when I was in the ambulance going to the hospital, I sort of said to the paramedics, dudes, I'm so sorry if I'm wasting your time. Look, I feel like there's other people out there that are going to need you more. And I'll never forget, the woman said, look, most of the time we get calls to these sorts of jobs. We don't find a person, we find a body. And I thought, wow, for all of the problems that we've got in our mental health care system, the fact that we have first responders that arrive at the scene and go, fuck it, we'd rather be safe than sorry. I still think, I didn't need it. But I was kind of grateful that that's in place. Is that too hardcore, that story?
No, it's incredible, and you're absolutely right. I lived in North America for about 10 years when there just isn't that kind of shit. Like if you don't have medical insurance, good luck. Like that we have that in our country is absolutely incredible, and I'm so grateful that they found you, and I'm so grateful that you went. I'm so grateful that you went with them. And just to go, okay, I'll just play this out. And
I didn't have the choice on that particular occasion. Like other times, I have hospitalized myself before. Like when I had my daughter, I had pretty severe postnatal depression, and I put myself in a psych ward, in a P&D unit of a psych ward, because I knew I wasn't coping, and there was 2 of us.
Can I just quickly ask Emma, like for people who are listening, they may have never there's this colossal stigma of picking up the phone going, I've just had a kid, I'm not coping, I need help, I know what's going on. What for you was the telltale, like, the countdown, like 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm making the call. What for you was the signs like, okay, I know where this is going. I'm going to have to do this.
I woke up one Sunday morning and I thought to myself, my daughter would be much better off if I wasn't alive. And it felt like a rational thought. It felt rational. And there was enough of me, and it's, still I feel quite emotional talking about it, but there was enough of a slither of myself to go, whoa, that is not a rational thought. And the moment I caught myself thinking that way, I was like, I need help. And I'm the same. Like I monitor myself constantly, and I've got my own sorts of red flags. And if I start thinking like suicidal things or self-harm things or that kind of stuff, and it's feeling rational as opposed to, okay, I know that this is a symptom of depression and it sucks, but it's okay. If I start thinking, that's pretty persuasive thought, there's maybe got a point about that. That for me is the moment where I don't fuck around.
Yeah.
I make the calls. I don't care. I don't care who knows. I don't care how, what stigma is attached. I know that at that moment I need to make the calls, and I always make the calls.
That is, and it's what you just, and this is what blows my mind about this sort of stuff, about hearing lived experience. It's so important. You can't be what you can't see. And your upbringing, who you are, what makes you up is so completely different to mine. Yet what you just described, nearly word for word, is how I tell people about my experience with suicidal ideation. When those thoughts showed up, it was like, you know what, that's a really fucking good idea. And then, and I never knew that. I never knew that it shows up as, oh man, it'll be awesome. It'll be for you, for them, for everyone.
Yeah.
Job
Makes
fucking done.
So much sense.
Everything's going to be fine. That's that's it.
Yeah.
It wasn't this, oh my God, it wasn't this scary thing. And similarly to you, it was like, oh, fuck, that's fucking crazy as shit. And I got on the phone. I was really lucky to know. And I think even just us having this conversation is so important, that people can hear this to go, oh, so if it ever shows up to them, they go, let me just check this. Because then if you don't check it, what happens then is you put yourself in the situation we were talking about before. It's you against willpower, and you will not win.
Yeah, absolutely, Osher. Like I feel really strongly, I guess, perhaps like you, about speaking really frankly about this stuff, because we don't talk about it.
No.
Like on the whole, like this has been one of those autism things that I've always blurted out. Like I really struggle when people ask, how are you? Because if I'm like horrendously depressed and battling suicidal ideation, I say that. Like it's out of my mouth, and it's like a morning tea, at work or something. Like but it's kind of a blessing in a way, because now that I've decided to run with it, like people ask, I tell them, and people ask, if people ask how I am, I tell them.
There's scientific reasons why we don't talk about suicide publicly, and it's important to recognize that. Yet it doesn't mean we can't talk about it altogether. Don't worry, when I put this episode out, there'll be a big disclaimer at the head, and there'll be a big tail ender, and I'll make sure that there's enough support around it. But it's just us talking about the way those thoughts show up is so, so important. Once you got out of danger, once you find yourself out of danger, unless I found in my experience, unless I started to address where the source started to come from, it's just going to keep happening again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
That work is hard. That work is tough. And initially I didn't want to do it. What was it like for you? Did you realize that you had to start looking to where this came from and start to unpack it and maybe reprocess it a bit?
Yeah, look, I had a really horrific early life, like really horrific, like child sex abuse, horrific. And one of the weird things, and this is something I really like about myself, is that from a really young age, I started seeking, help for my mental health. Like as a kid, quite young, early in high school, I started seeking out counsellors. I don't know why, I'm just so grateful that I had that particular urge, along with all the less lovely urges that I had. But I I really have sought counselling all my life, sought expert input all my life. It did take me a while to find a therapist. Auditioned a lot before I found someone that was just like, and I've been seeing her on and off for 22 years, and I have no plan of stopping. Like, I see her on a need to see her basis, and sometimes that's twice a week, and other times, 6 months will go by. But she's got you're in the worst state, right? Like to go therapist shopping if you're in the middle of a crisis. So it's one of those things that I always recommend people do ahead of time. It's like auditioning antidepressants. You're usually in the worst state possible to be experimenting with medications and therapists when you're in a real ditch. But I now have like a really good, solid team of people around me. And I've kind of got action stations that I go to when things start to unravel, as they inevitably do. Like, I expect to be dealing with my particular issues for the rest of my life. I figure they're sort of on par with, some people have diabetes that they have to deal with all their life. I've got mental health conditions that I expect to be managing all my life. But it's tough work and it's expensive work. Like, good therapy is expensive. And, I wish it was more affordable for more people, because, you hear psychiatrists or psychologists say a lot, it's skills, not pills. Like, medication is fantastic. I've been on antidepressants most of my life. They make a difference, but they're not a magic cure.
Yeah, it's not.
Therapy is hard. That's the
Yeah.
heavy lifting. And I'm really fucking glad I've done it. Like, my life is still difficult, but it's a lot richer than before I did all the heavy, hard therapy work.
So extraordinary to hear you speak like that. The way you describe it is, it's wild because I describe it all the time. I describe it all the time. Diabetes, like, say, type 1, you're born with it. It's a gene expression that showed up. Nobody's fault. Just fucking happened.
Yeah.
And you can have a great life if you manage it. You'll be fine. There's a few things you can and can't do. That's okay. And no one's got a problem that you medicate. No problem at all. But if you go, oh, I'm type 1 diabetic, and now I'm sitting here in front of you eating 12 Krispy Kremes, you'd be like, makes everyone around you, if you're not managing it, makes everyone around you uncomfortable. But if you're seen to be managing it, no one's got a problem. Off you pop. I'm so sorry that you went through what you went through when you were a kid. I really, really am. Unfortunately, what you went through is not uncommon. Whether it be sexual abuse, whether it be violence, what do we not talk about enough around childhood trauma and adult onset of mental illness?
What we don't talk about enough is what grooming involves. So grooming is the coercive type of brainwashing that child sex abusers and pedophiles use to keep their victims compliant and silent. And Grace Tame talked a bit about it last year, but with the book I've just done, I've really gone into it in detail, because it's that psychological manipulation. It's very similar to the type of brainwashing that you'd find in, totalitarian rehabilitation center. Grace Tame put it really well, and she said that's what can actually stay with you the longest and fuck you up, for the longest time, and that's something that sort of stayed very vivid for me, even decades and decades and decades later. And it also really distorted my memory of what had happened. It didn't like block it out or anything, but I fragmented my memory of what happened, so I couldn't really give a cohesive account of what happened, which is very handy for the abuser. But I also thought it was my fault. I thought I brought it on myself somehow, 7, like, but that's what my abuser told me. And, little people believe big people. So I think people don't really understand enough about that kind of, that sort of brainwashing and coercion and psychological torture that happens, and the way that can manifest right through the rest of someone's life.
Once those patterns of your perception of input and your relationship with truth and reality that are imposed upon a kid in that horrible, horrible situation, even though the situation might have gone, those linger and then can just magnify and amplify and just then suddenly show up way later in life. Yeah, we don't talk about that enough. We
don't talk about it enough.
Really
and there's some of the people who've read that section of the book that I've just written have said, oh, geez, it was pretty hard going. It was like, oh, really? You should have tried living it. Like, and what I've given is a very, but really compared to the reality, it's a very sanitized version. And it's difficult for people to read, I think people need to become more familiar with because a lot of child abusers abuse in plain sight. They're not the stranger in the car. They're people in our community, in our families. They're often quite charismatic because they've got to be ace manipulators. If they look like pedophiles, they'll get caught. So I think we need to know more about those kind of tactics, and also the way that kids show in nonverbal ways that things aren't, that something's wrong.
Yeah, it's the real big downfall of this sort of, sexual abuse coming to light I remember it was never spoken about, and suddenly it was spoken about in the 80s or so, and suddenly it was stranger danger because it rhymes. But it's not. It's far and away people that the kid knows, often people within the kid's family, and the word incest is never used because it's an uncle, it's a father, it's a mother, it's so we don't want to accept that is the majority of what's going on. We'd rather go, oh no, it's the bloke standing by the bus stop, I'm calling the cops. It's fucking not.
Yeah, it's fucking not. And, I watch, like QAnon and all their crazy conspiracy theories about pedophile rings and so on. I know they exist, but that is not the majority of the perpetrators. Are the people that we hang out with every day, the people that, have our trust, have our kids' trust. It's horrible, but we've got to face that. We just got to face it.
I was late to speak to you today. I was on Wolf Patrol, and I know you're a very busy person. I don't want to take up your time, but I would very much like us to cover one thing. You speak about being in the autism spectrum. You speak about having been in and out of psych wards. For people who are worried that if their mum or their sister or their dad or their son or their cousin or their lover, their boyfriend, girlfriend, goes through one of these things or gets one of these diagnoses, people may think, oh, that's it, they're fucked, their life's over. But here you are with the brain you've got and all the things that have happened to you. You've written 11 books. You have this incredible career.
I used to be able to play the lead break from My Sharona in all-girl band.
And a clarinet. I can only imagine that at some point you are able to see what is going on with your brain as part of the reason why you have the life you have.
Yeah, look, I identify as a sweet weirdo, and I have for some time now. I've run with being weird and nuts. I introduce myself that way. I talk really openly about all of the stuff I deal with, partly because, as weird as it seems to me, in some situations I'm seen as like really functional, and kind of like I have my shit together. And I like to point out, well, in these ways I absolutely do. But this is what I have to do to be able to keep functioning. And there's some times where even when I try really do all the things, I might still lose it. I've reached a point in my life where I don't really care what people think of me, and I really don't have anything to lose. So I think it's important to speak openly and to kind of, absolutely not role modeling, but to model what it looks like to have a mental illness and be responsible and to still be able to flourish and thrive as a human. Because both those things, and they're really closely linked, like taking responsibility to the as much as I can, not being reckless when I know what things tend to tip me, over the edge or make me get really wobbly. I'm a responsible mentally ill person, and also partly because of all of that work I do, a lot of the time I'm really thriving. And it doesn't mean I'm happy all the time. Like I'm not, and that's an unrealistic goal for anyone.
Yeah.
But thanks to lots and lots of annoying mindfulness meditation, I've got a lot better at accepting whatever I happen to be going through. So if I'm feeling bored or pissy or impatient, it's like, impatience. Hello, my old friends. Or, feeling like I'm going to cry every second of the day. Yeah, been here before, hello. Like that's good shit. Like to be able to sit and feel all of the different states of being human. And I can't always do it this as I'm describing it, but when I can, life is sweet. And it's not because I'm euphoric or happy, but there is a real peace that comes with greeting whatever happens to be arriving, even if it's an unpleasant state. And that's had a profound impact on my quality of life.
That's incredible to hear, and I'm so grateful that you were able to describe that experience, because I'm sure for people listening that they may have heard what you've gone through, or they may have been through something similar, and that's impossible. It's a fairy tale what you've just described. What are your thoughts on a diagnosis? Is that the be all and end all?
Look, it's tempting to take a diagnosis as a kind of sentence, or as part of your identity. Well, this is me now. I've got this. I'm a depressive, whatever. For me, like particularly having looked at the way diagnoses change so much over time. So the DSM-5 is like the psychiatric Bible. That's got all the definitions of all the mental illnesses. And, if you meet a certain number of criteria and you pass a threshold, you get your diagnosis. I hold diagnoses loosely, and not just because I've got so damn many of them. For me, a diagnosis is really helpful if I can use it as a tool. And so when I've had various diagnoses that meant, that means I should perhaps try these medications to see if they work. That's really helpful. That diagnosis has been really helpful to give me access to those things. With something like being diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum, there's no cure for that, but it's a very helpful diagnosis in terms of helping me develop some compassion for myself and my weird reactions, my weird behavior at times, as well as to encourage other people to potentially be a bit more compassionate by sort of saying, look, sorry about that. I know it was a little odd. It's part of this thing that I deal with. But, again, diagnoses change over time, and it's not like having a broken bone that a doctor can go and look at and go, yes, it's this. And, we can do this and it will be fixed. With mental health, it's really just clever guessing. And so, the diagnosis might change. You might get a different diagnosis. You might get more than one. A lot of conditions have a lot of overlaps, and it's very hard for people to tell. So, I think it's definitely worth holding them loosely.
And for people who may be the parent or son or daughter of someone who gets a diagnosis like this?
I'd probably say that I understand that it can be difficult and confronting, and we want our kids to live charmed lives, and life doesn't normally work. It really doesn't work that way. I'm very wary about giving advice because I know that everyone's circumstances are different. But I'd certainly underline the fact that there are incredible support options available, and the stigma around that, I think, is reducing. I like to cheer people up by pointing to famous crazy people, all the brilliant artists and writers, and but mainly I wouldn't be inclined to go, come on, let's look at the bright side. Like, it's traumatic to get a diagnosis of anything, and if it's your kid, or someone you care about a lot, you'd probably be really worried. I think it's super hard for partners and parents. Really hard. Like, we talk a bit about how hard it is to have the mental health problems, but fuck, it's hard for the people around us. Like, I've put my people through hell sometimes. Like, and I really, part of wanting to be a responsible mentally ill person is because I love my people and I don't want to fuck them over, and I don't want to make them suffer any more than they already are and already will suffer when they see me suffering. So I guess I would, sympathize that it's tough to be the support person or the parent.
I couldn't agree with you more. And to be honest, the person who's done the most work to get me from the hellscape that I was living in to where I am today is my wife. It's not me. And I've done fucking heaps of work.
Yeah.
It's her.
It's really tough, like,
Yeah.
and part of, I think, when I'm talking to other people with, particularly if they're having those suicidal thoughts, is that the thing that really has kept me on the straight and narrow is that I don't want to hurt my people, and no matter how bad things get, like, I've known people who've taken their lives and I've never got over it. It's a way of hurting people forever. And even if it feels like, you can't go another day, like, I hold very strongly to the fact that I love my people. I don't want them to I would never want to hurt them. That's a lot to put on someone if you're already dealing with a mental health crisis, but it's important.
You are such a fantastic human being to be honest and open. And the way that you've written so honestly about it and the way you've shared with me today, I truly believe this conversation is going to help a lot of people. And I'm just really grateful that you were able to be open enough to have it. Thank you so much.
Oh, look, my pleasure. And Osher, you've been a huge inspiration to me in terms of the way that you've spoken and your advocacy work. So thank you also, dude.
That's very sweet of you to say. Thank you. I'm all shucks now.
And let's get some kind of, we need to come up with some kind of hallmark card, sympathy card for the partners of the nut jobs, right? Like the.
Well, there's Mother's Day, there's Father's Day. We'll come up with a day.
Yeah.
We'll come up with a day. We'll come up with the nutcracker day or the nutkeeper day or something. Something, the gamekeeper day. Well, we'll think about it. I'll throw it up on the whiteboard.
Yeah, good. And we'll add that to our startup, our Osher Pillow startup.
Yes.
Yeah. Nice.